We're here at Electric Power Doors factory in Hibbing, Minnesota to demonstrate one of our medium to low range blast doors. This particular door has a high security lock on it, and it's about 4 feet by 7 feet in size. It's very easy to open by pushing down the handle and just grabbing the door and pull it. You can see that just a couple fingers is about all it takes. Just a slight little push will put the door in motion to close. The inside of the door has all the locking features mounted to the surface of the door, and then it's covered with these 14 gauge security panels. Inside the center assembly here is a bell crank mechanism that causes the pins to retract and extend. And then this piece here is a CABA X10 high security lock that works in combination with the dialer on the outside. You can see that the door, swings, very easy. And then as you swing the door shut, it'll latch itself in place, and it can again be very easily opened, with the latch handle. The door also has 2 precision blast door hinges. Each one of these hinges has radial bearings and a thrust bearing in it. And they're adjustable with the use of this set screw so that you can raise and lower the door in the opening to maintain the gaps at the head and sill by just inserting an Allen wrench in the screw and turning it to tighten or loose to correspondingly raise and lower the door. The door also comes shipped in a pre-hung frame that will slide, into the door opening. This door has holes where it can be plug welded onto the opening, or it can actually be bolted onto the wall. The shiny spots that you see right here are actually part of the factory assembly, which allows the door to be shipped to you pre-hung in the opening. That after we do all the final adjustments on the door, we take one of these steel wedges and place it in all the gaps around the door, and then tack weld that in place. And then after we cut the door down, these will hold the door in the proper positions so that all the hole locations will match up with where they were tested here at the factory. Every door that Electric Power Door manufactures of the blast door nature, we assemble them in a test frame similar to this, and we go through a full operational test procedure. We'll demonstrate some of the other features on the door now as we go through the operation of the high security lock and the features you can see on the inside of the door. Electric Power Door custom fabricates each of our doors for various customers. This particular customer required a high security lock, and for this lock we purchased a CABA Moss X10 lock. This lock basically is an electric lock, but it contains no batteries. In order to operate the lock, you actually have to turn the dial, and there's a small generator inside the mechanism that actually powers a rechargeable battery that runs the display. The display has little shutters in the windows that are kind of polarized so that you can only see the numbers while you're dialing if you're standing directly over it. If I was standing off to the side like this and dialing it, the dial is black like you see now. So when I turn over the top here and look down, I can see the numbers as I'm dialing. And so what I'll do is I'll dial the default number, and when I come up with the right number rotating counterclockwise, I'll stop, turn it in the opposite direction, and there's a small arrow that tells you which direction you need to turn, and you'll come up to the next number. And as you're dialing, the numbers change, and they are not continuous in their speed that they change. So in other words, the numbers can change 3 or 4 numbers per revolution, or it can only change 1 number per revolution. And so if you try and auto dial this, it would just about be impossible to you know, come up with the right combinations of speeds and numbers. And even if you videotape me doing it, the next time it would dial, it would set up a different sequence as far as how many turns it takes to get the right digit. So it's a very highly sophisticated lock. So I'll dial in the last number here, and then I'll show you how you open the door with the right sequence after the final number is dialed in here. Now that we've dialed the last digit, the latch is retracted for the high security lock, and now we can turn the latch handle and open the door up. Once you've dialed the number in, the next thing you want to do is to push this push life safety button, and what that'll do is that locks the outside dial, so you mechanically and physically can't turn the dial and relock that. So at this point, the door operates just like an unlocked door, but it still latches so that the door is securely latched by the pins at the top and the bottom of the door. And by rotating the handle, you unlatch the pins, and you can open the door and swing it open. And every time you latch it, the lock will not engage until you pull this button back out and redial the outside dial. And then at that point, it'll relock itself. So we'll go through and do that. Now we'll pull the pin out, the safety lock out, and we'll redial the outside dial. I'll turn this a couple turns. And now at this point, when we close the door, it'll automatically lock and latch itself. So now if we unlatch the door, which means pulling the dogging pins down from the top and up from the bottom, they're not holding the door, but the lock itself is holding the door from the outside. We'll go around to the other side of the door now and demonstrate the operation of the door from the inside. To operate the door from the inside, the very first thing you have to do is you have to unlock the door. And we'll use the word lock and latch. They're two different terms. The lock is this piece and the latch is this piece. So to unlock the door, you turn this knob as the arrow shows, and you hold that, and then you turn the latching handle downward and you swing the door open. And as the door swings open, there's a trigger mechanism at the top pin of the door that'll actually hold the latches in the retracted position. After you've operated the door and gone through and need to reclose the door, that you can swing the door to the closed position, and you'll want to grab the pull handle on the door and not pull the door closed by the latch bolt handle. So you'll pull the door closed firmly, and once you do that, the latch bolts will extend and hold the door closed, and the lock will also re-engage. And so we'll demonstrate that if you try and open the door with just the latches and not the lock will still prevent you from opening the door. So we'll turn the latch handle to release the latches, but the lock is still holding us shut. So you have to turn the knob on the lock to allow the door to open. You may run into occasions where when you need to exit the door, there may be ventilating loads that are actually pressurizing the inside of a door and pushing it away from the opening. And when that happens, it will actually put some load on the little pin in here so that it can't slide with the mechanical advantage you gain by turning this lock. So if that's the case, what you want to do is pull back on the handle while you're turning the latch. And then once you have that accomplished, then release the latch bolts. And that'll assure that you can always unlock the door. Likewise, when you pull the door shut, if you've got a lot of ventilating load, you'll want to notice that this latch handle is not horizontal, and the dogging pins are not fully engaged unless this handle is horizontal. So at that point, if you do have, ventilating loads, or you get some debris in the hole in the bottom of the door, you'll just want to grab this handle and just give it a little tug, and you can see the latch handle now went back to the horizontal position. And then again, to reopen it, you just turn this knob, throw the latch handle, and swing the door open. And in most cases, unless you have unusual ventilating loads or high wind loads, that just by pulling the door shut, firmly closing it, that your latch handle will fully engage, and you just want to check that that's in a horizontal position. There'll also be some signage made up on some laminated plastic signs that'll be attached to the inside face of the door in this area that'll give you the operating instructions for the door.
Now that we've looked at some of the key features of the door, we'll go over some of the maintenance and operation points on the door that you might expect to encounter during the life cycling of the door. As we mentioned before, when the door is shipped from the Electric Power Door factory, there's going to be steel wedges welded in around the edge of the door. These are used to maintain the spacing of the door for the latches and the hinges during the transportation and installation of the door. After the door is installed into the wall, either by bolting in or welding to the frame and getting everything level, then the next step would be to remove these wedges and then actually operate the door. While the wedges are still in place in the door frame, the whole door assembly is brought into the rough opening in the wall. And the key thing of putting the door in the opening is to slide it through the rough opening, and then to use a large precision level to actually make sure that the hinge barrels are in line, and to get them leveled both in the plane of the door and in the plane perpendicular to the door. And this is critical on the heavy doors because the axis between the hinge line must be perfectly plumb in order for the door to swing and not to try and find its own center as it moves up and back like a pendulum. So by using this level, we can make sure that the axes of the hinges are perfectly aligned. So the next step after getting the door level is to put some plug welds or use your bolts or whatever you're going to use to fasten the door to the wall in place, and go around the door and tack it in place with enough weld to hold the weight of the door. You need to make sure you have enough weld there, because what we're going to be doing next is grinding off the welds on these wedges and taking them out. The wedges right now are holding the gaps of the door uniform to the exact same tolerance that was used to operate the door at the factory. So once the door is installed with enough weld around the outside, then you can take a small grinder and just grind through the welds on either side of the wedge here and just pull those out. And you do that all the way around the door. Once the wedges are out, the next step is to actually operate the door, and you want to be very cautious when you're doing that, because you want to make sure, first of all, that all your welds are good and sound, and that you have the area cleared around the door, so if something did happen and the door moved in the opening, that you're not injured or things are damaged by the door. So after the door is securely welded in place and the wedges are removed, the next step is to grab a hold of the door and stay out of the path of the door, and to actually operate the latch handle on the door. And then you should be able to gradually open the door open. And just slide it open and just gradually swing it up and back, and you can let go of the door and it should stay in place. If you have the hinge line out of the plumb adjustment, the door will start moving by itself after you let it go. So the key to good installation is you should be able to move the door just a little bit, stop it, and let it go, and it'll just stay in place. So then after you've verified it with the door just open a little bit, open it a little bit further, stop and hold and let it go. And you can see it starting to move a little bit here in our factory assembly. That's because our jig, you know, actually is not totally rigid. So it's actually moving the jig a little bit and allowing the door to tip outward. But in your installation with the wall heavy enough that this door should just stop after you let it loose. So you can continue on opening the door to the full position. And you just want to check it at each one of these spots. If you do get a lot of movement, you know, on the door, then you'll want to close the door back up and put the wedges back in place and try and move it and check your level again. One of the features on the door is the adjustability of the hinges. The hinges can be adjusted upward and downward by means of these set screws that are in the top of each one of the hinges. The hinge itself has got a jam nut that is tightened around the top barrel to hold the elevating screw in place. And so what you need to do is to, you know, first of all, the factory had these adjusted correctly when it left the factory. And while you're swinging the door, as the door gets to the fully closed position, if you feel any kind of a bind or a catch, or if you see any kind of scraping on the head of the sill, that's an indication that the door needs to be raised and lowered. One of the critical things on the doors that have these high security locks on them is that the strike on this lock is like a little hoop, rectangular hoop, and that has to engage into this little angle, so that angle slot has to gauge perfectly into this little slot here, and there's very little tolerance on there. So the key point would be to very carefully close the door and get it almost fully closed, and just check and see if you feel any kind of a resistance. And if you do, you can kind of put a piece of paper between the strike and the latch bolt part, and you'll see whether it's scraping on the top or the bottom, and that would tell you whether you need to lower the door or raise the door. We'll get an Allen wrench and kind of show you how that raising and lowering operation should be handled. Each one of the hinges on the door has one of these adjusting screws on it, and if you need to raise the door, the very first thing that you need to do is to loosen the jam nut, and you just turn that to get that loose from the top of the hinge. And then when you're going upwards, you'd insert an Allen wrench into the screw head, and then you just turn it just slightly, and that's going to actually push the Allen screw down on top of the hinge pin and raise the door up. And you only really need to do that on one hinge, because the top hinge is going to be raised by itself. Since it's connected to the door, that it'll raise itself. So what you do is you'd make your adjustment here and then go back and repeat the operation of the door. So you'd swing it open and you'd swing it closed, and if you don't feel any kind of resistance or scraping, then what you'd want to do is finger tight the jam nut down, put your wrench on the jam nut, and then hold the Allen wrench while you tighten the jam nut. now that set screw is going to stay in place while the door is operated and rotated so it won't be moving by itself. But if you don't tighten that jam nut down over a period of time, the door will actually start turning the nut, and it could actually cause the door to lower on its own. Once you do the adjustment on one of the hinges, you can also, take up some of the weight of the door by adjusting the other hinge, again by loosening the jam bolt, then setting the Allen wrench in the set screw and just giving it a little bit of a tightening too, just to try and put an equal amount of load on each one of the hinges. So again, we'll put our wrench up here. We'll hold it, while we're tightening it. And once you have both the hinges set, then you should be good. The hinges also have a grease zerk fitting on the lower part. And that grease zerk will push grease up into a radial bearing and a thrust bearing that's inside the lower portion of each one of the hinges. So this is something that should probably be done yearly or more often depending on the conditions of the door. If it's outdoors and it's subject to corrosion, you'd want to grease it more often. We'll go through and we'll look at some of the inside parts of the door now. We'll demonstrate the actual action of the latch mechanism by shutting the door here. So I'll pull the door shut and then we'll pan up and get a shot of the trigger mechanism as it hits its strike at the top plate. So as I pull the door shut, you'll see it hit, and you'll see this trigger bar rotate back because it's hit by this little extension of the top block. And once that happens, then the pin shoots up into the hole and the latch is, complete. We use like a standard business card or a thin piece of paper to actually try and insert it between the door and the seal. And you should be able to feel friction as you're putting that in so that the seal is making good contact with the door. If you run the card around the door, you should feel, a drag as you're pulling it along. Now on this is the latched edge of the door. You can kind of see that there's not quite as much drag, and so before this door ships, we'll actually take and shim that seal out a little bit more so it'll be equal drag all the way around. And after your install, there may be a slight twist in the door. You might have some other conditions where you might need to add some shim material behind the seal. You can see here that right there the seal's tight against the door, and then right in this area here it's just off by about the thickness of the card, so it's pretty close, and we'll make a final adjustment here at the factory before that leaves. But that pretty well covers the installation, the maintenance, and the operation of the door. If you have any other questions, please feel free to call the factory at our toll-free number 1-800-346-5760 and ask for the engineering department, and they'll be glad to help you.